said you could cook.
I said I could manage a kitchen.
That's not the same thing.
No, it isn't.
Rooms at the end of the hall, $2 a week, breakfast at 6.
The smoke was the first thing anyone noticed. It rolled under the kitchen door and spread through the front hallway in a slow gray drift, reaching the boots of 7 boys before any of them thought to do something about it. Holt, the oldest at 17, had seen enough to know this one wasn't urgent. The youngest, Sammy, was 4 years old and had not spoken a word since February. They stood in a row and watched the smoke and waited. Inside, Maggie Slade was having the worst 30 minutes of her recent memory, which was saying something. The chicken was black. The biscuits were black. The gravy had split into something pale and watery surrounding what appeared to be boot leather. She had the back window open and was working a dish rag against the smoke when the kitchen door opened and the boys filed in one by one, all 7 of them, solemn and quiet, like a jury that had already made up its mind.
I can explain.
She couldn't. There was no explanation that would help. She had known the chicken was burning for 20 minutes and had kept going anyway, because stopping felt too much like admitting she had no business being there. The boys looked at the table, then at her, then at each other. And then Sammy, who had made nothing resembling happiness in 8 months, laughed. A small sound barely more than a breath catching wrong in his throat, but it was real. It cracked the silence in that kitchen the way a stone cracks ice, sudden and complete. Nobody moved. The back door opened. Emmett Shaw came in from the yard, hat in hand, sawdust on his shirt. He took in the smoke, the ruined table, the line of 7 boys, and the woman by the window holding a dish rag against her chest, like something she was protecting or hiding. He looked at Sammy. His son was still smiling, faint, almost gone already, but it had been there. Emmett had seen it from the doorway. He looked at Maggie.
Mr. Shaw, I'm sorry. I can start again. There's still time to.
Sit down.
She sat. The boys found seats around the table without being told, which said something about how often this kind of thing was managed by routine rather than instruction. Emmett picked up a biscuit, turned it over once, and set it back down with the care of a man who was thinking about something other than the biscuit.
Holt, bacon and eggs.
Holt was already moving toward the larder. Emmett sat at the head of the table and tasted the gravy, an act of either courage or fairness. She couldn't decide which. His face gave nothing away. When supper was done, Holt's eggs, serviceable and plain, Emmett stayed at the table while the boys went upstairs. The sound of 7 boys on wooden stairs was its own kind of weather. Then it was quiet.
You answered the ad.
Yes, sir.
Said you could cook.
I said I could manage a kitchen.
That's not the same thing.
Silence.
No, it isn't.
He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and pushed in his chair with the deliberate quiet of a man who did everything once and didn't revisit it.
Rooms at the end of the hall, $2 a week, breakfast at 6.
He went out. The back door closed behind him without drama. Maggie sat at the table alone with the wreckage of the worst meal she had ever made and tried to understand what had just happened. The room at the end of the hall was small and clean. A window that faced east, a braided rug on the floor so old it had lost most of its color. Someone had put a quilt on the bed, the careful kind stitched in a pattern that took time. A woman's touch, she thought. The kind that outlasts its maker. She set her bag on the floor and unpacked slowly. 2 changes of clothes, a comb with a cracked handle, a tin cup, a small Bible she had taken from a boarding house 3 towns back because she needed something that felt like steadiness, and it was the only thing on the shelf that qualified. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a handkerchief and tucked inside a wool stocking, $41. She had counted it enough times that the count was automatic, like a prayer you've said so many times it runs on its own. She crouched by the window. The floor gave slightly at one corner, the way floors do in old houses built fast by men who were already thinking about the next thing. She worked the board up and set the stocking underneath it, pressed it back down, stood on it. Then she went to find where they kept the coffee. Holt found her in the kitchen at 5:15 the next morning. He was tall for 17, lean in the way of boys who had worked too hard, too young, with his father's gray eyes and his father's talent for saying what he meant in as few words as possible. He stood in the doorway and said, without moving, "My mother's things stay where they are."
All right.
"The blue tin on the shelf isn't for cooking. Don't touch it."
I won't.
He came in, moved her aside from the stove with 2 fingers on her shoulder, and showed her how to work the damper. Not unkindly, just directly, the way you show someone a tool they're about to use wrong before they damage something. When he was done, he made himself a cup of coffee and took it outside. No more words. Maggie stood at the stove and looked at the damper. Right. Breakfast was better than supper, which wasn't setting a high bar. The eggs were acceptable. The coffee was strong enough. The biscuits had color on them, which she considered an accomplishment. 6 of the 7 boys ate without complaint. Emmett ate without complaint. Nate, 10 years old and apparently the least diplomatic of the group, looked at his plate and said clearly, "These aren't as good as Mama's." Jack, sitting beside him, put an elbow in his ribs. Nate said, "Ow."
Eat what's on your plate.
Nate ate what was on his plate. Sammy had taken the seat next to Maggie. He ate slowly, looking up at her every few bites, not seeking anything, not asking for anything. Just watching, the way a cat watches something new and hasn't decided yet whether it belongs. After breakfast, while she was washing up, she heard the door and turned to find Emmett still there, coat in hand.
Gideon and Thomas stay home today. School days are Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Jack, Wes, and Nate go this morning. Holt stays with me.
Yes, sir.
Gideon will eat anything you put in front of him. Thomas will tell you he doesn't like something before he's tried it. Give him half as much and he'll ask for more.
He put on his coat.
Don't let Sammy go past the near fence without someone with him.
I won't.
He was already at the door when he finished. It was the longest he had spoken to her since she arrived. The days had a shape she learned by moving through them. Emmett and the older boys left before full light. Gideon and Thomas filled the middle hours with the particular energy of boys kept close to home, loud, then silent, then loud again for no reason she could identify. Sammy followed her, not underfoot, not demanding. He appeared when she went to the well and stood nearby while she drew the water. He sat on the kitchen step while she scrubbed the pots. He didn't ask for anything. He was just present, the way a shadow is present without making a point of it. On the 4th morning, she was rounding the side of the house with an armful of dry wood when she nearly walked into the kitchen garden, or what was left of one. The beds were still laid out. Someone who knew what they were doing had planned this, had thought about sun and drainage and the turning of seasons. But the summer growth had run wild, and the first frost had finished most of it. A few stubborn herbs remained, sage, gray-green and tough, time still holding. Something she didn't recognize with small purple flowers that had dried on the stalk. She stood looking at it longer than she meant to. When she looked up, Emmett was watching her from the fence line 40 yards away. He turned back to the fence. She went inside. On the 5th day, she found the recipe book. It was on the lowest shelf of the kitchen cupboard, behind a row of preserves. Cloth-bound, worn at the corners, the spine cracked from use. She opened it expecting handwriting she didn't know and found it, a woman's script, small and precise, filling the pages with recipe after recipe, written with the care of someone recording something worth preserving. Roast chicken, salt pork and beans, dried apple cake, pickled beets. A dozen variations on cornbread, each one noted with the season it was best suited to. And between the lines, in a different hand, larger, straight up and down, written in pencil that had been pressed firmly and then perhaps softened a little over time, were notes. Try less salt. The butter wants to be cold first. Cast iron works better than the pan for this one. The vinegar doesn't need as much time as she says. Corrections. Patient, practical corrections, the kind you only make if you've been paying close attention for a long time. She turned to the back pages. The writing there was more frequent, less correction and more conversation, 2 kinds of handwriting talking to each other across years of the same kitchen. She closed the book and put it back. There are men who say everything and mean very little. There are men who spend 20 years writing in the margins of their wife's recipe book and consider that enough. Most women end up with the first kind. A few get the second. Some of them even know what they have while they have it. Emmett came in before the others the following morning. He poured his coffee and stood at the window, watching the gray outside go slowly lighter. He didn't say anything for long enough that she stopped noticing him, which was how she was standing too close to the stove when he spoke.
Garden's worth saving. If you wanted to try.
She turned.
I don't know much about gardens.
Seeds are in the blue tin.
She looked at the shelf.
Holt said.
I know what Holt said.
He put down his coffee and went out. She looked at the blue tin for a full minute before she went and lifted the lid. Seeds, yes, labeled in small envelopes in the woman's careful handwriting, organized by planting month. Carrots, parsley, sweet peas, string beans. At the bottom, one envelope in different handwriting. His, a single word, lavender. She put the lid back on. The afternoon was warm enough to sit outside. She brought Sammy with her to the front steps while she mended a tear in Gideon's coat, and he settled beside her with his knees pulled up and watched the road the way he always watched it, steadily, as if keeping a private account of what passed. She worked in silence. After a while she said, without planning to,
What do you see out there, Sammy?
He didn't answer, of course he didn't, but he turned and looked at her, and after a moment he put his small hand on top of hers on the coat fabric and pressed down once, gently. The way you press a hand to say, I know you're here. She kept sewing. She didn't trust herself to look at him. If this story is reaching you, whether you're driving, folding laundry, or just taking a quiet few minutes for yourself, drop a like, or leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It's a small thing, but it helps the platform understand this kind of story is worth finding. 3 days after that, she went to Elm Hollow for supplies. The town was small enough that a single general store covered most needs and large enough that a stranger passing through wasn't worth remarking on. She bought flour, lard, dried beans, cornmeal, a half pound of coffee, and a bolt of gray wool she'd been thinking about for the younger boy's winter wear. She was at the counter waiting for her change when 2 men came in through the door and stopped near the barrel of horseshoe nails just behind her. One of them was describing a woman, brown hair, slight build, came out of Missouri, worked as a household keeper for a man named Crain, helped herself to the household money when she left. The other man asked about the reward. The first man said a number. The other man whistled low. Maggie looked at the counter. The storekeeper came back with her change, and she said thank you and picked up her basket and walked to the door at a pace that was neither quick enough to notice nor slow enough to cost her anything. She didn't breathe properly until she was past the edge of town, far enough that the sound of the street was gone and the only sound was the horse's hooves and the wind off the flat ground. She sat on the wagon bench and let the horse walk for a while. The money was hers. Every cent of it, 4 months of wages she had asked for and been refused, taken back the only way left to her when asking had stopped working. That was the part the notice never mentioned. It never did. The sky was very wide out here. It had taken her weeks to stop finding it unsettling. All that space, all that air, nothing between a person and the weather. She was starting to understand why people stayed, how a place that felt like nowhere could become somewhere if you let it. She picked up the reins and headed back to the ranch. She was quiet at supper. She served the stew, a beef stew that had come out right, which Wes acknowledged by having 3 helpings without being asked, and which Nate approved of by comparing it favorably to something he'd had at school, which was not high praise, but was the most enthusiastic thing he'd said about her cooking in 2 weeks. She washed up and then sat on the front step with her hands in her lap and watched the dark come in from the east. Emmett came out at some point. She heard his boots on the boards but didn't look up. He stood at the rail with his coffee, the way he did when he was thinking something through, long enough that she thought he'd decided against saying it.
You all right?
Not quite a question, more like a door left open.
Fine. Just tired.
He nodded. He went back inside. A minute later, the screen door opened again, and he set a cup of coffee on the step beside her, without a word, and went back in. She looked at it. Then she picked it up. The storm came 2 nights later without much warning. She woke to the sound of the barn shutter going, that rhythmic bang and crack that means something loose is getting worse in the wind. She pulled on her coat and went out, because it was closer to her end of the house and she didn't want it waking Sammy. The wind was sideways and cold. She got the barn door open and found the loose shutter high above the hay, swinging on one broken hinge, throwing itself hard against the frame every few seconds. She dragged a stool over and climbed up and got both hands on the shutter, but couldn't hold it flat and reach the latch at the same time. The wind had too much of it. Then 2 hands came from behind her, long-fingered and work-hardened, and pressed the shutter flat against the frame. She reached past them and caught the latch. Got it on the second try. She should have stepped down off the stool. She didn't. Wind still came through the boards. The barn was loud with it and dark, and she was standing closer to him than she had stood to anyone in a long time. He didn't step back. She could feel the warmth of him along her left side, and the steadiness of it. No tension, no demand, just present. She was aware, with some precision, that she should move. She stepped down off the stool, which made the decision for her.
Go inside, you'll freeze.
He was already moving to check the other stalls, lifting his lamp, back to practical without transition, as if nothing had been there to remark on. She went inside. She stood in the dark kitchen for a while before she lit the lamp. The rhythm of the house shifted the second week, in ways she felt before she could name them. The boys had started telling her things not because she asked, but because she was there and she listened. Gideon told her at length about a horse he had seen near the creek, that he was convinced was wild. Thomas told her the same story 3 days running with different details each time. Nate explained his theory that a person could survive on cornbread and cold water indefinitely if the situation called for it, and laid out his reasoning with more structure than his schoolwork apparently received. Jack said almost nothing. He watched from a remove the way Emmett watched, taking things in without offering much back. She respected it, she recognized it. Which was why she didn't hear him come in. She was at the kitchen counter with her back to the doorway when the small sound told her he'd already been somewhere he hadn't announced. She turned around. He was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was holding the stocking. She went entirely still. He looked at her across the kitchen, this quiet 14-year-old with his father's restraint and his own particular intelligence, and turned the stocking over once in his hands. "Sammy's horse rolled under your bed," he said. "I went to get it."
Put it back.
He set it on the table, not throwing it, not threatening, just setting it down the way you'd set down something that belonged to someone else. He looked at her for a moment, the long, quiet assessment of a boy who had been watching for 2 weeks and drawing his own conclusions without announcing them. "I'm not going to say anything," he said, "but I thought you should know I know." He took Sammy's small carved horse from his coat pocket and set it on the table beside the stocking. He looked at the horse once, then at her, as if that settled whatever he'd needed settling. Then he went back outside. Maggie stood at the kitchen table alone. She had been waiting for this for 2 weeks, the thing that would break it open, the thing that would end it. And instead he had put Sammy's horse on the table and told her it was safe. She didn't know what to do with that. A week passed. Emmett's manner didn't change. Same quiet, same coffee on the step, same way of leaving things better than he'd found them without noting it. The door hinge she'd been fighting for a week was quiet one morning, tightened without comment. The shelf near the stove that dipped in the middle was level. A new catch on the root cellar lid she'd been propping open with a stone. She said nothing about any of it. She was starting to understand that this was his language, not the absence of something, but the thing itself. Wes, 12 years old, the quietest of the middle boys, came and found her in the garden one afternoon. He stood at the edge of the bed with his hands in his pockets and watched her work without saying anything for long enough that she looked up.
Something on your mind, Wes?
He shrugged. Then, after a moment, "You're doing the lavender wrong."
I'm following the instructions on the envelope.
Mama did it different. She said it wants to be dry. You're watering it too much. He said it plainly, without cruelty, the way you tell someone a fact they need to know. She sat back on her heels and looked at the bed.
Show me how she did it.
He considered this, Then he came and crouched beside her in the dirt and showed her. They worked the bed together for half an hour without much talking. When they were done, he went back inside, hands still in his pockets, as if the whole thing had been nothing in particular.
Thank you.
She stayed in the garden a little longer, looking at the lavender. She asked Emmett about Sammy one evening when the boys were all in bed, and it was just the two of them at the kitchen table. She had been careful not to ask for weeks, the way you're careful around something that might bruise.
When did he stop talking?
Emmett looked at his cup.
February. His mother died in January. By the time February came, he'd stopped.
Was he there?
A silence longer than most.
He was in the room.
She said nothing. After a while, he said more to the table than to her.
Doctor said it comes back on its own sometimes. Could take months, could take longer. No way to know.
He will. You can see it in him. He's listening to everything. He's taking everything in. He's still all there.
Emmett looked up.
I know he is.
3 words. But the way he said them, like she'd confirmed something he'd been needing confirmed, something he'd been holding alone for 8 months, sat with her for the rest of the evening and into the next morning. She was reaching for the high shelf 3 days after that, the heavy jar of dried corn pushed too far back when the stool shifted under her. She caught the shelf edge. She didn't fall. But the stool had gone sideways and a hand came to her waist and held it flat to the floor, which kept the situation from getting worse. She got the jar. She stepped down. She was face to face with Emmett at a distance that the barn had given her first, in the dark, in the storm, when there was an explanation for it. There was no particular explanation now. He was looking at her without the usual closed-off practicality, and she was looking back at him without the usual careful management of where her eyes went. The back door opened. Gideon came in asking when supper would be ready.
10 minutes.
Gideon disappeared. Maggie turned to the counter and began opening the jar. Her hands weren't entirely steady, which was new. The rider came late on a Tuesday, passing through toward the next county, stopping at the Shaw gate the way travelers did when they needed water for the horse. Emmett went out to meet him. Maggie was in the kitchen with the window open. The man mentioned the way people share news on the road casually, as something to fill the silence, that there was a notice up in Elm Hollow, a woman being sought for theft. He read the description off a folded paper. Height, color of hair, last seen heading west out of Harrisburg, $20 reward. Maggie set down the pot she was holding. Very carefully, without making a sound, the rider got what he needed and moved on. Emmett came inside. He looked at her once, a straight, complete look, the kind that takes everything in and settles it somewhere without a lot of procedure. Then he took the folded notice from his coat pocket, set it on the kitchen table, and walked through to the back of the house. She looked at the paper. She didn't touch it. She waited until past midnight. The house had settled into its night sounds, the pop and shift of the walls, the slow breath of 7 boys in various rooms, the nothing sound of Emmett's room dark under the door. She packed the way she'd arrived, bag over one shoulder, everything that mattered inside it, nothing left behind she couldn't stand to lose. She pried up the corner board and took out the stocking and tucked it in the bag's inside pocket. She wrote a note at the kitchen table, plain and short. Said she was grateful. Said she was sorry about the trouble. Said the lavender seeds in the blue tin needed to go in before first frost, in the corner with the most sun. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She opened the door to the hallway. Sammy was standing there. He was in his nightshirt, feet bare on the cold floor, awake the way children are sometimes awake in the night, not groggy, not half there, but completely present, both eyes open and full. He was holding the small carved horse in both hands. He looked at the bag on her shoulder, then up at her face. He held the horse out toward her, not handing it over, offering it, the way you offer something to keep, a thing made by someone's hands, weighted with what it stands for, extended toward a person you're trying to hold in place with the only argument you have. She set the bag down. She sat down on the hallway floor with her back against the wall. Sammy came and sat beside her, his shoulder against hers, the horse held in his lap. He didn't try to move the bag. He didn't ask for anything. He just sat with her in the dark hallway at midnight and was present, the way he had always been present, quietly, completely, without making a demand of it. She stayed. He was on the front porch before dawn, coffee in hand, watching the fields go from black to gray. She heard his boots when she came out and stood beside him at the rail, not because she wanted the cold, but because this needed to be outside, needed air around it.
The notice is about me.
He looked at the fields.
His name is Crain. I cooked and kept house for him in Harrisburg for 3 years. He stopped paying me in September. By December, he owed me 4 months of wages. When I left, I took what he owed me from the strongbox. 2 weeks after I'd gone, he had a notice out saying I stole it.
The light was coming up slowly. The fence posts were becoming individual.
I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth, and because if he comes here...
Did he hurt you?
Not a question. Exactly. The tone of a man who already suspected the answer and was asking to have the shape of it confirmed.
Yes.
A silence, long enough that a bird called twice from somewhere in the brush.
Then it stays here.
You can't just...
The notice stays here. What you told me stays here.
He picked up his coffee.
You took what was owed to you. Any judge with a ledger can see that.
Crain doesn't have a ledger.
Then it's his word, which is what it always was.
She looked at him.
Breakfast at 6.
He went inside. She stood at the rail and watched the fields finish turning light, and she thought about what it meant. Not the decision itself, but the speed of it. No hesitation, no conditions, no questions she didn't want to answer, just, then it stays here. Crain came 2 days later, which was 2 days sooner than she'd hoped for. 2 horses on the road. A man in a gray coat and a hired man riding beside him. She saw them from the kitchen window while the bread was rising. She stood very still with her hands on the counter. Emmett was at the far fence. She could see him at the distance, and she could mark the moment he noticed the horses, because he straightened and turned toward the house without finishing what he'd been doing. She went to the front door. Crain was about 40, with a soft face that had learned to look reasonable and eyes that gave the lie to it. He pulled up at the gate and removed his hat in a gesture of courtesy that was entirely performance. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said. "I'm looking for the man of the property." Maggie said nothing. She stood in the doorway. He recognized her. She could see the exact moment it happened, a small recalibration in the eyes, the performance adjusting. "Well," he said, "that does simplify things." Emmett came across the yard with the pace of a man who was covering ground without appearing to hurry. He stopped at the gate. He did not open it.
Can I help you?
"Emmett Shaw. My name's Gerald Crain. I believe you've been employing a woman who left my household under circumstances that need addressing. I've come to collect her return and the money she took when she left, and we can all be on our way without further trouble."
She doesn't work for you.
"She did until she helped herself to $41 from my strongbox, Mr. Shaw. I have a legal notice."
I know about the notice.
Crain paused. "Then you understand I have every right to..."
You have the right to bring your complaint to the law in Elm Hollow. You don't have the right to come onto my land and make demands.
The hired man shifted in his saddle. Crain kept his eyes on Emmett with the studied patience of a man who was used to getting what he wanted by wearing down the resistance. "She stole from me," he said with less pleasantness now. "I want what's mine returned, the woman and the money." Maggie stepped forward. She had made herself hold still until now, and she was done with it.
I took 4 months of wages you owed me. You have the household books the same as I have my memory of every number in them. You know the figures.
Crain looked at her with the particular contempt of a man who had decided long ago that some people existed to serve a purpose, and stepping outside that purpose was a form of insubordination. "You don't have a ledger," he said. "You have a story." The front door opened. Holt stepped out and stood at the top of the porch steps, then Jack. Then Wes and Nate and Gideon and Thomas, coming out one by one and ranging themselves along the porch rail in the order that 7 boys naturally assume when they are forming a line, biggest to smallest, side by side, looking at the men at the gate with a complete and unhurried attention. Nobody said anything. They just stood there. Crain looked at the row of boys. He looked at Emmett. He looked at Maggie. He was doing arithmetic, and the numbers were not going in his favor.
Bring the law if you want, Mr. Crain. I'll be here. She'll be here. You'll bring your complaint, we'll bring ours, and we'll see which one the judge finds more interesting.
A long silence. Then the screen door opened quietly, and Sammy came out. He crossed the porch in his bare feet, which was going to be a conversation later, and walked to Maggie and took hold of her hand. He looked at Crain the way young children look at things that are wrong, plainly without managing it into something polite. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the first words he had spoken in 8 months. "Go away." Nobody moved. Crain looked at the child holding her hand. He looked at the row of boys on the porch. He looked at Emmett Shaw standing at the gate with no particular expression and no apparent intention of moving, ever. He put his hat back on. "You'll hear from the law about this," he said.
I'll be here.
They rode out. Maggie stood on the porch with Sammy's hand in hers and watched the 2 horses go until they were small on the road and then gone. The hired man looked back once. Crain did not. Gideon said from somewhere behind her that Sammy had just talked. Nate said he'd heard it too. Thomas said he'd heard it 3 times. Thomas had not heard it 3 times, but no one corrected him. The boys went inside, one at a time, without ceremony, the way they did everything. Holt was last. He looked at his father for a moment, a look that contained something Maggie didn't have a name for, being an only child herself, and then he went in and the screen door closed. Emmett came up the porch steps and stood beside her, looking at the road. After a while, she said,
He might still bring the law.
Let him.
If it comes to a hearing,
It won't.
you can't know that.
A man who won't show his household books doesn't go before a judge. He goes looking for easier ground.
She looked at the empty road.
I was leaving, she said. 2 nights ago. I had my bag. I was at the door.
I know.
She stopped.
You knew?
Heard you in the hall. Heard you put the bag down.
She turned to look at him.
You didn't come out.
Didn't need to. You were deciding something, not my place to interrupt.
A quiet.
I stayed because of Sammy.
I know.
Another quiet. The kind that says there is more than one reason a thing happens, and both can be true at once. He turned toward her. Not fully, just enough to make it clear he was no longer looking at the road.
Why else did you stay?
She looked at her hands on the rail. Then she looked at him.
You know why.
He was still for a moment. Then he reached out and put his hands over hers on the rail. His hands were warm. She had noticed that in the barn, pressed together in the dark, and she noticed it now. She turned her hands over under his and held on.
You're not going anywhere.
Not a command, not a question. The same thing he always did, stated what he'd already decided, and left the door open in case she wanted to agree.
No, she said. I'm not.
He didn't pull her toward him or make anything of it that the moment didn't already contain. He just stood there with her hands in his and looked at her the way she had learned by now, not closed off, not practical. Present, fully and quietly present. The first time he kissed her, it was brief and without any ceremony, and it was exactly enough. The law didn't come. A letter arrived from a county clerk 2 weeks later, dry and formal, stating that the complaint had been reviewed and found insufficient to proceed, given the employer's failure to present wage records or documentation of employment terms. Emmett read it at the kitchen table. He folded it once and put it in the kindling box. Sammy said 4 more words that week. Not in a rush, not all at once, one here, one there, dropped into the silence of the house like stones into still water. At supper on Thursday he asked for bread, and Holt, who was sitting across from him, picked up his fork, looked at the ceiling for a moment, set it back down, and passed the bread. That was the whole of it. That was enough. The garden came back slowly, the way things do when they've been given up on reluctantly at first, and then with conviction. She planted the lavender last in the corner with the most sun, the way the envelope instructions said to. Sammy helped, which meant he made the holes too deep and she adjusted them after, and he put too much water on everything and she didn't say a word about it. She found her way with the stove. Not mastery. She wouldn't claim mastery, but a working arrangement. The kind you reach with anything that's going to be part of your life for some time. Holt, on a morning in November, came in while she was managing it and watched her work the damper without needing to be reminded. He poured his coffee and went outside and said nothing, which from Holt was as close to a compliment as the weather got. By December, he had stopped saying her when he meant her. He said Miss Maggie instead, which cost him something and he paid it anyway, which was the whole of the thing. Emmett wrote in the margins of the new recipe book she'd started. Small notes, penciled in, the same straight up and down handwriting she had seen in the old one the first week. Try less salt. The butter wants to be cold first. Cast iron, not the pan. Some things don't change. They just find a new place to put themselves. Second chances don't always arrive looking like what they are. More often they arrive looking like a disaster, smoke under a door, a burned supper, a woman standing at a window with a dish rag pressed to her chest, and a child who hasn't smiled in 8 months choosing that exact moment to smile. You don't know what's happening until you're already inside it. And sometimes that's the only way it works. If you'd seen it coming, you might have stepped aside. Staying is harder than it looks. Not the dramatic kind of staying, not the gesture you make in front of witnesses, the ordinary kind, the kind where you wake up and choose the same people again. Maggie Slade chose to stay in a hallway at midnight because a small boy held out a wooden horse, and that was argument enough. That choice, unremarkable as it appeared from the outside, was the whole story. Before you go, leave a comment. Has there been a time in your life when you had your bag packed, you were at the door, and something made you put it back down? It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes the thing that holds us is very small. I'd really like to hear it. Sammy put the carved horse on the kitchen windowsill the morning after Crain left. He carried it out of his room with both hands and set it on the sill where the light came in, and no one moved it. It was still there when the lavender came up in the spring, small and gray-green and unlikely, the way things are when they have survived something and don't see the need to make a fuss about it.